Welcome to the API webinar, Prepare Your Shop for New Diesel Oils, CK-4 and FA-4. I'm Becky Burrows, Director of Recognition and Specialty Events with Randall Riley, and it is our pleasure to have you all in on what is sure to be an informative session. We will hear from Kevin Ferrick with API this afternoon, discussing how fleets and shops will need to be ready for the two new diesel engine oils arriving in the market today. API CK-4, which will succeed the current CJ-4 engine oils as the backward-compatible diesel oils, and FA-4, the newest addition intended for engines built beginning with the 2017 model year. Preparation should start now. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few things that will help you get the most out of this webinar. To get a full view of the presentation, click the arrows on the Grab tab on the top left of your control panel to minimize the panel. This will place the tab on the top right of your screen and will enable you to see the entire presentation. We would also like to encourage questions. To ask a question, bring your control panel back by clicking the double arrows and type your question in the box that says Enter a Question for the Staff. We will answer these at the end of the webinar. Thank you for attending, and please make sure you ask your questions as they arise. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker. Kevin Ferrick currently manages API's Engine Oil Licensing and Certification System, a voluntary licensing program designed to define, certify, and monitor engine oil performance. The program's marks, the service symbol donut and certification mark Starburst, help consumers identify quality engine oils for their gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles. Mr. Ferrick also manages API's Diesel Exhaust Fluid Certification and Motor Oil Matters programs. Mr. Ferrick became the Engine Oil Program Manager in March of 1998. His duties include the management of the API Lubricants Group and its work groups and task forces. Kevin, we welcome you today. I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Becky, thank you for the kind introduction, and I want to thank Randall Riley for the great support that they provided us in doing these webinars. For those that have been participating in the webinars that we've been doing, this is actually the third webinar that we've done on CK-4 and FA-4. For those that have sat through all three, you deserve special commendation. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move and talk a little bit about the topic at hand, about CK-4 and FA-4, and talking about how shops and locations should begin or should prepare themselves for these new oils. For those that have sat through the first two, I have to commend you, and I apologize if some of this is going to be repetitive, but there are some things that we always like to do, particularly if we have new participants. So with that in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about exactly what the American Petroleum Institute is, essentially who I work for. API is the only national trade association that represents all aspects of the oil and natural gas industry. So we are a nonprofit trade association, and again, that we represent the oil and natural gas industry. Our 650 corporate members are from the major oil companies to the smallest of independents, and they essentially come from all segments of the industry. Our members are producers, refiners, suppliers, and marketers, pipeline operators, and marine transporters, and service and supply companies that support all segments of the industry. So, in a nutshell, API is the trade association that represents the oil and natural gas industry in North America and globally on many issues. How do we achieve our mission? Well, we do it through several key responsibilities. We are an advocacy organization, so we do advocate on behalf of the industry. But there are three other things that we do that actually take up and probably represent a significant amount of API's effort. Research and statistics is one. Standard setting. API is responsible for more than 500 industry standards that relate to the oil and gas industry. And then we operate certification programs, so we certify against the standards that we write. So since, as I mentioned, we are a standard setting and a certification body, the area that is of the greatest concern to me and relates directly to what we're going to be talking about today has to do with the setting of API engine oil standards. API actually, as of next year, API will have been setting standards for engine oils for the last 70 years. The first API engine oil standards were introduced in 1947. There are 3 specific documents that pertain to engine oil that we have to maintain: API 1509, which is our engine oil licensing and certification system document. It is also the document that provides the performance standards for API, and it also describes the licensing program. So whenever someone asks us, well, what's the performance standard for API CK-4, what we would tell them is feel free to download API 1509. It will provide the information you need on the new standard. We also have API 1525, which is a bulk oil testing, handling, and storage guidelines document, and 1525A, which has to do, again, with bulk oil, but it has to do more with chain of custody and how bulk oils are identified in the marketplace. As part of our standard setting, so we've been doing that for 70 years, but for just over 30 years we've been licensing oils against those standards, and for more than 23 years we've been auditing licensed and unlicensed oils in the marketplace. And by auditing, I mean that we buy oils in the marketplace and test them to ensure that licensed oils do meet the API standards claimed. So the marks, when we talk about our certification and licensing program, what goes hand in hand with that would be our program marks. So the slide in front that you see in front of you actually shows the marks that only an API licensed company may use on their products. The 4 to the left, the one that's the upper left corner for gasoline engines, the Starburst as we call it, is actually one specifically designed for gasoline engines. The other 3 are any engine oil that meets our standards would be licensed to use the other 3 marks, in this case what we call the API donut. We'll talk more specifically about the 2 in the middle, the API CK-4 at the top, in the middle top, and then in the middle at the bottom, the FA-4. We'll be talking a little bit about that too. So licensed oils are eligible or are permitted and licensed to use these marks on their products and in conjunction with their products. And then for those, since this is a diesel engine oil discussion, we also have to point out that we do license diesel exhaust fluid. So for many rigs that are on the road today, they're now using diesel exhaust fluid, and we like to make sure people are aware that we are licensing fluids, those particular fluids that meet the ISO standard. And if you need to use this fluid, we'd like to remind people to always make sure you use an API certified diesel exhaust fluid to make sure you get proper performance. All right, so a little bit more about both the API engine oil licensing program and our diesel exhaust fluid certification program. For many, we always make sure that people understand that the API engine oil program is a voluntary program. So companies globally that are licensed by API have opted or chosen to license their products with API. They are not required to do that, but if they are licensed by us, they also understand that they are adhering to the program rules, which essentially means that they're going to produce, market, and distribute product that is in compliance with API standard, and so they're putting themselves on the line with the commitment that they're going to make a quality product that their customers expect, and they do that voluntarily. The standards that we operate against are developed in cooperation with oil marketers, additive suppliers, trade associations like ASTM, ACC, and SAE, and with the vehicle and engine manufacturers. On the gasoline side, they're represented by the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and the Japan Automobile Manufacturers. And then on the heavy-duty side, the Truck and Engine Manufacturers Association. So when we develop the standards, we essentially get all of the interested parties together to come to an agreement on a standard that all of the parties agree will provide protection for the equipment that's in the field on the road. And as part of our engine oil program, as I mentioned earlier, we do monitor our licensed product in the marketplace through our aftermarket audit program. That's where we buy product in the market and test it to make sure that it meets our standard. Diesel exhaust fluid certification is also a voluntary program. It certifies diesel exhaust fluid against the ISO standard, ISO 22241. And much like the engine oil program, the fluids are monitored in the marketplace through the API aftermarket audit program. As far as statistics go, where we are today, as of the time we made this slide, we're currently at 742 licensed oil marketers today. We're in 60 countries. We have licensed marketers in 60 countries. And it represents 15,000 licensed products. And with CK-4 and FA-4 licensing, that number is continuing to grow. On the diesel exhaust fluid side, 84 licensed diesel exhaust fluid marketers in 6 countries and 144 licensed products. Okay, so now let's talk about, now we've got the preliminary information out. Let's talk a little bit about preparing for CK-4 and FA-4. So when we talked about how we would present this and what kind of information we thought would be useful, we thought it would be best to talk about essentially what we would call a checklist, or the steps that a location that's going to be handling CK-4 and FA-4 may need to keep in mind as they start looking to integrate the new diesel engine oils into their shops. So the first thing that we would recommend would be to create a transition plan, because people might think that all oils are the same, but I can assure you they are not. So you're bringing in new CK-4 and FA-4 oils. You need to understand that they are different. They're an improvement, but they are different from the products that perhaps you've been using, and in this case for CJ4 for the last 10 years. You should assess your shop's needs for CK-4 and FA-4. Bear in mind that for the engines that are on the road today that have been using CJ4, they can continue to do that, but it's likely too that the engine manufacturers will begin recommending CK-4 for those applications, and they'll want to see CK-4 going into those engines because it's a better oil. FA-4 requires a little bit more of an assessment. You need to understand that engine manufacturers are going to recommend FA-4 for specific engines. So a shop that may do service on engines may need to decide whether they're going to be seeing those newer engines and how soon they might need FA-4. And then we say the third item, check on specific oil availability from your supplier. Bear in mind that while most people think of engine oil, perhaps, and they think about it when they go into a store and it's in a packaged product, the reality is that a significant amount of engine oil that's dispensed is coming out of bulk. It's coming out of tanks, from hose reels into vehicles. For the heavy-duty side, that's critically important. In fact, vast majority of the oil changes done on the heavy-duty side are coming out of bulk tanks. But even if you're talking about lighter duty applications, say diesel pickup trucks, they could just as easily be serviced from an oil change location, and generally those are going to be using bulk product too. So depending on the application, people need to be aware that they should be checking with in the case if they're getting bulk deliveries, they need to check with their distributors to make sure that they understand exactly what oil is about to be dispensed into their tanks. Another part of the checklist would be to educate staff. Technicians and drivers should be educated on all changes. So to put it bluntly, they should be aware that there's new oils coming out. So they shouldn't be caught by surprise if they find out that there's this brand new oil that's being recommended for their rig. So it's something that they should be aware of. They don't want to be caught by surprise. And then they should enact a transition program, which the simple way, designate the date to remove confusion for storage and application changes. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it sort of makes sense that you need to realize that when these new products come in, you need to start speaking about them to the customer so that they're aware that this is a new standard, that the new oil is the one that's being used in their rig or in their diesel engine. So now, let's talk now about, so we're talking about doing a transition plan. Well, what are the next steps when you're going to put together a transition plan? Well, first item, assess your needs, know what is recommended for your fleet or your customer base, to estimate volumes, etc. And it's for CK-4 product, if you're currently using CJ4 and you're looking to transition to CK-4, should be a fairly seamless adjustment. It's just a way to tell your customer that there's this new standard, and the new standard is what's being recommended for on-road or on-highway applications, or for non-road applications, depending on what the OEM is recommending. The other piece that they're going to have to pay a lot more attention to is FA-4 and when they need it and how much they might need. As we say here, preparation for 2017 model year engines will require particular attention. So in the case of locations that are going to be servicing new engines, they will need to consider how much FA-4 product they might need, and they'll have to make sure that they can get it if it's necessary. And then we say check on availability. So you want to speak to your oil supplier to see how and when the oils will be available. I will tell you that if you mention to your oil supplier that you've heard about these new oils, and you would like to understand when you might receive them, if you get a blank stare from your supplier, you probably should have, because I think it's important for people to know that these oils are coming. So now, as far as availability, viscosity grade recommendations are also changing. That's something else that could be coming along with this. So we've introduced these new diesel engine oil categories. It is likely that engine manufacturers may use this as an opportunity to recommend going to a lighter vis grade. So you may, if you have an engine manufacturer that's currently recommending 1540 CJ4, there's a possibility that they will now recommend a 10W30 CK-4, and that may by itself be an adjustment for diesel engine operators, so for fleets or for owner operators. If they've been accustomed to using 1540 for years, telling them that they can now use 1030 will be a bit of a transition. So you want to make sure that you're aware of it. You want to make sure that you understand whether you've got those products available and that you're prepared to have them available for your customers. And then the last piece, you want to create a plan for the staff. You want to create a transition program for the shop. You may need to have some increased storage, particularly with the new FA-4 product. If a location has got one tank, at some point they may need to think about having two, or they're going to have to think about how they accommodate the FA-4 product. And then by all means, they have to be clearly identified, because you don't want to misapply. You don't want to put an FA-4 product in where a CK-4 is recommended. And then you want to manage the tanks, the storage, and the labeling in advance of the first delivery, so to prevent the risk of commingling and misapplication. Again, the CK-4 is the obvious upgrade to CJ-4. That transition should go fairly easily, but the FA-4 it's important to note that the FA-4 is coming, and it can't be commingled. It's going to have to be handled separately. All right, so let's talk about educating the staff. Well, probably the simplest, easiest way to tell them about these new oils is to point out to them that there's going to be these two new oils. The CK-4 will be the fairly easy one to manage, because it's going to be, as you can see on the left-hand side, there's really not going to be any change from the CJ-4 donut. So if they're accustomed to seeing product literature identification of certain products, they hopefully will recognize the API donut. So you can essentially tell them, look, the CK-4 is the CJ-4 upgrade, so the donut, the API service symbol donut, is going to be the same that as you see here on the left-hand side. When you're trying to explain to them about FA-4 and about the importance of using FA-4 oils where recommended, we try to make it easier by putting a different donut on that packaging. So in this case, as you can see, FA-4 is placed differently than the CK-4, and it's done deliberately to try to at least give pause to, say, a service facility or a location that does service on a diesel truck, so that they will realize that an FA-4 oil is a bit different. And bear in mind, when you look at these two donuts juxtaposed, you have they're both 10W30s, and another teaching point would be to say, look, the reason the FA-4 donut is different is because not only is the standard different, but the viscosity is actually different. The 10W30 FA-4 is not the same as the 10W30 CK-4. If hopefully the best thing that comes out of any kind of discussion you would have from trying to explain these marks is that if they realize that there's some differences, it'll give them pause, and they'll take an extra moment to make sure that when they're doing service on a truck, that they'll make sure that they grab the right oil. Okay, so now if they ask us, well, why are there two different API engine oil categories? Because normally there's only, whenever we upgrade, we only upgrade with one new one. Well, let me give you a few words that you can share with them. Note here that we say API CK-4 and FA-4 actually was approved by API back in February. It's actually been approved. It was actually originally approved by ASTM about a year ago now. And first licensing, I'm happy to report, is today, December 1st, 2016. So today is the day that licensees are allowed to display CK-4 and FA-4 brands on their packaging and on any kind of documentation or information on their product. As of 8 a.m. this morning, there were 109 CK-4 licensed products and 21 licensed FA-4 products, and that number will continue to grow. You weren't supposed to see CK-4 and FA-4 before today, but I'm happy to report that no one ratted anybody else out. So apparently everyone kind of adhered to the rules and didn't use the CK-4 or FA-4 donuts in advance of today. It's the good news. The oils are now licensed, and they are available. Hopefully, they are going to start appearing in the marketplace with the new donuts on their packaging. Now, as far as CK-4 and FA-4, the new categories improve on the existing CJ-4 standard by providing enhanced protection against oil oxidation, protecting against engine wear, particulate filter blocking, and piston deposits, and protecting against degradation of low and high temperature properties. So, CK-4 and FA-4. They were developed to provide improvements to the protection that CJ-4 had been providing, and both categories were developed after basically through years of collaborative effort to develop collaborative effort with the engine manufacturers, oil marketers, and additive suppliers. They worked very hard to develop the tests and the methods used to measure the CK-4 and FA-4 performance. So why are there two? Well, we do point out that not all engines are the same. 2016 versus 2017 engines, the 2017 engines are likely to be smaller. They're going to be more efficient, somewhat duty cycle dependent. These engines are different, and they do require, in some cases, different lubrication regimes. So FA-4 and CK-4 were designed with that in mind. The new standards were also developed to meet new government regulations and to ensure engine oil performance. Actually, that's the one that they always start with. They want to make sure that the engines perform adequately and are well protected. And these engines are being designed to meet new government regulations, and the engine oil that's used in them plays an important role in their operation. How important of a role? Well, engine oils really are integral to an engine's performance. Engines today have tighter clearances, they have newer materials, They have smoother surface finishes, which still need to be lubricated. There are coatings on parts that have to be protected. These engines are reliant on having greater cleanliness. So CK-4 and FA-4 are being introduced to help protect these engines and the demands that these engines have. So when you're telling the folks that work with you that are responsible for maintaining and servicing engines and for making sure that fleets operate correctly, the real bottom line is that the new API standards were put in place to help meet the needs of the engines that are that are on the road and are going to be on the road. They're there to protect them. They're there to help them provide better performance, and largely the oils are intended to protect the engines, and these engines are being changed and improved to help meet more stringent government regulations related to emissions and fuel economy. So let's go into specifics about how both CK-4 and FA-4 provide improvements. So CK-4, as I said, will replace the current CJ-4 engine oils, and it is the backward compatible oil, which means CK-4 can be used where CJ-4 had been recommended. It's going to feature improved shear stability, oxidation resistance, and aeration control. As we say here, API CK-4 oils will be in traditional heavy-duty viscosity grades, basically 1540, 10W40, 10W30. They're created to replace the oils used in the current engine technologies, and these are the technologies that are the engines that are currently expecting to see a certain high temperature, high shear viscosity. CK-4 oils are intended to be used in on and off highway applications, including all classes of trucks, agriculture, and construction. If having a graphic showing you the difference between CK-4 and CJ-4 helps, what you're seeing on the screen should do that. CJ-4 provided a great deal of protection. It was a great engine oil that was around for 10 years. CK-4 is going to be the upgrade to it. So you'll see a few things that are very similar. Oxidative thickening was a goal of CJ-4. Oil oxidation, improved protection against oil oxidation is CK-4. So it's an upgrade. Viscosity loss carries it forward. Particulate filter plugging, another one that CK-4 is supposed to do a better job of. Engine wear, CK-4 will provide better wear protection than CJ-4. The one that you'll notice there under CJ-4 did not have as a requirement for aeration. Aeration is part of CK-4, and aeration is important to keep in mind. A couple things to know about: if an oil gets entrapped air in it, entrapped air is not a particularly effective lubricant. It also causes some other issues inside the engine, particularly when the engine relies on the oil as a hydraulic function. So you don't want entrained air in your engine oil. So CK-4 is designed to help prevent that. So overall, why do we move from CJ-4 to CK-4? Because we needed better performance, and the list on the left is the one that's showing you that there's that improved performance. Now, FA-4, the other thing you notice that the list for FA-4, if you stare at it, is basically the same level of properties as CK-4. That was intentional. FA-4 oils have to meet the same performance requirements as CK-4. You'll notice that they also have to provide protection for aeration, against aeration, piston deposits, engine wear, degradation of low and high temperature properties. But the one thing we point out at the bottom there is a very important difference. FA-4 is blended to a high temp, high shear viscosity range of 2.9 to 3.2 centipoise, and that compares to 3.5 minimum for a CK-4. So when we say that an FA-4 oil and a 10W30 FA-4 oil is different from a 10W30 CK-4, it's genuine. The FA-4 oil is a different viscosity grade than the CK-4, and that was put in place to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It is one tool that an engine manufacturer may choose to use is part of their design to meet more stringent greenhouse gas emissions. But it's important to note that FA-4 is not backward compatible. So for engine manufacturers that recommend it, that's the oil that that the owner-operators and fleet management companies need to use, because it's that engine where it's recommended is designed to make best use of that engine oil. But the opposite is also true. If the engine manufacturer is not recommending FA-4 for particular engines, then the CK-4 is the oil that needs to be used. So we try to make it very clear whenever we talk about CK-4 and FA-4 we stress the importance of making sure that owner-operators, that fleet owners make sure that they adhere to the recommendations being made by the engine manufacturers. If FA-4 is recommended, use it. If CK-4 is recommended, then you want to use that. Okay, let's talk about FA-4. I mentioned that FA-4 has very similar improvements to CK-4. But as we say here, FA-4 will include lower viscosity grades to meet the needs of the next generation diesel engines being built in 2017. FA-4 oils are intended to help increase fuel economy while providing strong protection. But as we say here, these oils have limited backward compatibility because some older engines were not designed to operate with the FA-4 viscosity. Remember, we talked about oils providing in some applications hydraulic function. Engines are designed to handle a certain type of viscosity. So if FA-4 is recommended, that's the one to use. If it's CK-4, then use CK-4. We often get asked, so we always like to tell people, why do we call it FA-4? Well, mostly because we wanted to be sure it couldn't be confused with CK-4. It's fairly simple. So what are the key improvements? Some key improvements on both of the oils. Shear stability. So CK-4 and FA-4 are going to provide better protection against shear stability. Shear stability is the resistance of oil molecules to shearing or breaking down under extreme stress inside the engine. So both those oils will do a better job than CK-4. Shear causes oils to decrease to a lower viscosity, and excessive viscosity loss could affect how well the oil can protect the engine. So again, CK-4 and FA-4 are going to be better at that compared to CK-4. For oxidation stability, it's similar. Oil oxidation is one of the main reasons for oil breakdown, and it occurs more readily under higher engine operating temperatures. So with newer engines running hotter, CK-4 and FA-4 standards will deliver improved oxidation versus CK-4. And then aeration. We talked about aeration a little bit earlier. Aeration is the entrainment of air bubbles in the oil, which can limit the ability for the oil to cool and protect the engine, because, again, air bubbles are not particularly good at doing that compared to the engine oil. New engines with higher operating temperatures and pressures can increase the amount of air trapped in the oil. And then as oil is more regularly used as a hydraulic fluid for valve train actuation, the oil's effectiveness can become compromised by aeration. So CK-4 and FA-4 are designed to protect against that. And then another term that you're going to often hear, and that I've used even here, I admit, greenhouse gas reduction. We've talked about the high temperature, high shear that has been brought up related to the new oils and their development. CK-4 oils are what they call the high temp, high shear oil, because their viscosities are the same as those found in CK-4. So a 10W30 CK-4 oil and a 10W30 CK-4 would be the same viscosity. But in contrast, FA-4s are the lower ones. They're the low, high temp, high shear oils, because their 10W30 is lower. They've been developed to provide the engine manufacturers with a tool that will help them meet the more stringent fuel economy and greenhouse gas emission requirements that they're faced with. So again, the important thing to take away here, if nothing else that you remember, an FA-4 oil has a new donut. It's intended to be designated. It's intended to be viewed differently because we want to make sure that it is only used where it's recommended. But where it is recommended, the engines are designed to make use of that particular oil and the benefits that oil provides. And that includes the lower high temp, high shear viscosity that hopefully will result in fewer greenhouse gas emissions and ideally better fuel economy. So now, talking about, you now know about putting together a plan. You understand why these new oils have been developed and the benefits they provide. Now you got to think about enacting the plan. You do want to identify a clear date to incorporate the new oils into the shop. Again, today is the day that the oils are licensed. When is the first time that a truck is going to come in that requires an FA-4? I apologize, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me to tell you when that will happen, but you should expect that eventually that will be happening. You want to monitor the inventory volumes of your CJ4 lubricants versus your CK-4 and FA-4 to ensure that you have adequate supply. You do want to clearly mark your product, bulk or packaged, as either CJ4, CK-4, or FA-4. You do not want to be commingling them. When we say here, ensure appropriate steps for application, specific dispensing, and measurement equipment to reduce confusion and misapplication. To put it bluntly, you need to understand when you're getting your CK-4 and FA-4 lubricants. You need to make sure that they're properly segregated. If you have bulk, you want to manage those tanks. Ideally, draw your CJ4 product down to as low as possible before you put in the new CK-4. It's just best to avoid commingling. And FA-4, you definitely don't want to commingle because, again, bear in mind, CK-4 and FA-4 are two different viscosity grades. If you mix the two of them in a tank, at minimum, it could have an effect on the viscosity, and it may be a measurable one. And remember, I did mention that API does test engine oils that are dispensed in the marketplace, and it wouldn't shock me if we were to test a bulk diesel product. If there had been an FA-4 and CK-4 commingled, that there could be some impact on the viscosity, which would mean that the oil would fail our testing. So it's very important to keep in mind you have to segregate the FA-4s from the other products. So let's talk a little bit about CK-4 and FA-4. And remember, we talked about trying to educate the people that work either manage your fleet operations, manage the maintenance of the fleet trucks, owner operators that are concerned about the maintenance of their vehicles. If you're looking for more information on CK-4 and FA-4 education awareness, there are some other opportunities for you to get that information. We do have a very active social media presence, both Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. Currently about 23,000 followers and growing. If you want to look for one of the things you'll find either promoted through these or through API's website dedicated to diesel engine oil matters, it would be dieseloilmatters.com. You'll find some other you'll find other items there, pieces of information, videos that hopefully will provide a little bit more training and maybe a little bit of some cautionary statements on what you can and can't do and how you need to. Hopefully you'll be able to use them to educate the people that you feel you need to enlighten on the importance of the new CK-4 and FA-4 products. So with that in mind, there's a particular, I'll share one particular video that would be available through our Diesel Oil Matters site.
Diesel oil is about to change. Starting December 1st, API is introducing two new engine oil performance standards, API CK-4 and FA-4. It's important to note as a shop owner that you're going to have to handle two oils where you used to handle it as one. To find more information on API CK-4 and FA-4, go to dieseloilmatters.com.
Okay, so as I mentioned, when it comes to CK-4 and FA-4 education, there are some resources available at dieseloilmatters.com, which you can see on your screen. You'll be able to provide some specific information on the API categories, including the new CK-4 and FA-4 standards. So with that said, I'd be happy to entertain some questions.
All right, well, thank you, Kevin, for that valuable information. The first question that we have from the audience is, how long will the CK-4 oils be available in the U.S. market?
Well, CK-4 oils will continue to be licensable. There's significantly more CK-4 licensed oils than there are, obviously, CK-4 with only about 100, just over 100 available now. CK-4 will be around. It's not going to go away. The thing I would point out to people to keep in mind is that if they really need a CK-4, and for those who have followed some recent developments, Ford Motor Company has put out some guidance that they want CK-4 oils. They're recommending CK-4 oils for some of their diesel engines. CK-4s will be around, but make sure that you look at your packaging. If you really need CK-4, CK-4 will be the highest performance level noted in the API donut. So it's something that people are going to have to be a little more cautious about as CK-4 works its way into the marketplace. Right now, I'm fairly certain that if you went into any location right now, you'd find CK-4. If you need it going forward, it's just best to make sure you turn the bottle around, look at the donut, and make sure that CK-4 is the first and highest performance level in the API donut.
Okay, great. The next question that we have is it safe to switch from 15W40 oil to 10W30, and what are the benefits of the lower viscosity oils?
Okay, now first, to make that switch, we always remind people to check with their engine manufacturer before they do it, to make sure that they're recommending 10W30s for their engine. If they do, the likely reason is because 10W30 will provide the protection the engine needs, but may also provide a fuel economy benefit. There is data to show that lighter viscosity oils do help provide better fuel economy. But the important thing to keep in mind, can they switch? Yes, assuming that they get the proper recommendation from their engine manufacturer.
Okay, and I know we already looked at how long the oils would be available for CK-4. The next question is, will CK-4 oils provide a fuel economy benefit?
Well, CK-4 is not really the oil. So FA-4 is the oil that has been touted as the one that intended to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But that said, a lower viscosity CK-4, if it provides better fuel economy, which many believe if you go to a lower viscosity oil, it will, then in theory CK-4 could also provide a benefit. Again, it won't be the same probably that as FA-4. FA-4 is the oil specifically identified as the one to be used to achieve, it's the one that's specifically identified to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that said, could a lower vis CK-4 do it? I suppose that's possible if you follow the logic that lighter viscosity oil would provide better fuel economy, if you burn less fuel, you're emitting less greenhouse gases. That said, we always tell people, make sure you check with your engine manufacturer. Don't just switch to a different vis grade without checking with them first.
Okay. Next question. What happens if FA-4 oil is put in a CK-4 engine?
Well, it's not backward compatible. If someone asked me flat out, is it a problem, I would probably tell them to get that out. We deliberately designed the system to make sure that there's not misapplication. If you've got an engine that requires CK-4, that's the one to use. If it requires FA-4, then you got to use FA-4. You don't want, this is not a situation where you can just jump between the two.
Great. Now, how will I know when new CK-4 oils will replace CJ-4 in my shop?
Well, okay. The important thing to note is if you're receiving bulk engine oil, so if it's being delivered in bulk containers, depending on how you're taking delivery, if it's a drum, then the label should identify the performance level. About half the states in the United States require that performance properties that engine oils be identified by their brand, their viscosity, and their performance level. So if you're taking delivery, you should be getting delivery documents that identify whether the product is CK-4 or CJ-4. If you're not getting that kind of information, so if you're taking bulk delivery and the bulk documentation is not identifying the performance level of the oil, so if it's just saying that it's a particular brand name and a viscosity grade, then I would say the shop owner, the service facility should be going back to their distributor and demanding more information, because in this case, particularly with the two new categories coming out, it's really important to know exactly which oil you're getting. So if you're not getting, if you look at your delivery documents, the delivery documents are not properly identifying the performance, then you really need to go back to your supplier and, quite frankly, demanding more information, because you don't want to have misapplication. You don't want that to occur.
Okay. And the last question that we have today is CK-4 compatible with older oil specifications?
Yes. The simple answer is yes. It's backward compatible, which means if you have an engine today that's using CJ-4, you should be able to use CK-4 in that application. CK-4 is, to be blunt, is the easier one for us to manage. It is essentially the upgrade to CJ-4. So in applications that have been using CJ-4, they should be able to migrate to CK-4 unless, of course, you have a Ford engine. So that's the easy one. The one that's going to be tricky is the FA-4. That is not backward compatible unless specifically identified by an engine manufacturer. So for that one, you really need to check with your engine manufacturer before you consider making a change.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Kevin, for your valuable insight and the information that you shared this afternoon. We certainly want to thank you, our listeners, for attending today's webinar, and we hope that you've gained innovative information on running your business more effectively. We also thoroughly appreciate API for making this webinar and its entire series of webinars possible. If you do have questions for the speaker that we were not able to address during the program, please send them to me. You can do so by replying to the email you received from GoToWebinar with today's login information. If you would like to view the webinar again or send it to someone else in your company, you can download the webinar by going to www.ccjwebinars.com. The website will also be updated with additional information on future webinars as they arise.